And good morning. Let me pull up chat here. We're having technical difficulties for the second stream in a row. And last time, it did not stream to YouTube. Today, it is not streaming to Twitter/Periscope, and I do not know why. So, we're just going to go with it. Okay, good morning. Let me take a sip of my new cup of coffee because I spilled my first cup of coffee and it went everywhere. So that was fun. So today I would like to talk about a mini learning journey that I went on primarily yesterday, trying to research one little thing, right? I just wanted to do one thing. I knew what I needed to do. I just didn't quite know how to do it. And that led me to try this and then learn that. And then it was just this chain of events. And I'm like, when does this rabbit hole end? It was, yeah. So based on that experience, I came up with my own meme. So I thought I kind of understood what I was doing in this realm of BC REST APIs. Like I'm not an expert, but I'm like, okay, I know how to do a basic retrieve a record from Business Central, right? Like it's not hard. I've done it. And so I know how to do that, right? So I thought I had figured that out. Well, it turns out just in the domain of retrieving a record from Business Central, I was just touching the surface, and there is yet an entire world below that for this one topic that I did not know existed. And like, I don't know how people figure this stuff out, or maybe they don't. Maybe there's only a few people, but I eventually figured out, but it took 12, I went back through 12 months of material that I knew existed and had, I'll talk about. And I had to go through that and gather 12 months worth of learning to put all these pieces together, which looked something like this. Like I'm just pulling at little threads, just trying to figure out how all this fits together. And it finally kind of gelled at the end. And I was like a raving lunatic by the end. But yeah, maybe it's just me. Maybe everyone else is some like API genius that knows all this stuff. But wow, just the stuff that you gotta pull together and kind of know, or at least be aware of. That's half the problem. It's like I didn't even know what this one thing was. I'm like, how would I even know to look for that? And it's discussed as if it's like, oh, you just do that. Like, what is that? I don't know. So you gotta learn a few things that you don't know. And if you don't know, you don't know. How do you know that you don't know? You know, the famous conundrum. So it all started with a nice simple request. Customers, BC REST API customers. I just wanted to retrieve one customer. And in retrieving that one customer, I was like, cool, got my customer data here, right? Yes, but what's missing from this? I looked at this, I was like, cool, that's my customer. But then I was like, wait a minute, where is the customer contact name? Like Robert, if Robert Towns is the contact, where's his actual name? I see an email there, but I don't see the name. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's probably under a contact, which is under the customer record, more or less. So, okay, got it. So we need to get a customer contact. So how do we do that? Well, 12 months ago, I attended a class by A.J. Kauffman. And if you have not attended one of his classes, I encourage you to do so. He has great classes, the best classes. And I attended his class in June of 2020 on Business Central APIs. So I kind of knew what I needed to do to get my contact data, kind of. So one of the slides here from the class is know your 7 basic query parameters. Cool. Okay. So I tried it, but it didn't work, or I didn't know how to use it for this particular data set. So I knew how to get customers. I kind of knew that I needed to use the expand query parameter to get contacts, but what's the name of the contact object or entity or whatever it's called? I didn't know. And I realized I didn't know how to figure out what the object name was. So I was searching and searching, and I found his blog post, which I apparently had tweeted about, from December 2020, where he talks about changes to the Business Central API, which is BC REST API v2.0. There's some pretty significant changes in there, and you really need to understand what those are. Even if that's all you've used, I could read this 5-10 times and probably learn something new each time I read it. So I reread it, I read it again, and okay, it told me what I kind of knew, but then it talked about things I didn't understand. Okay, so then I kept digging, and I went back to the 2020 Wave 2 launch event and rewatched the video by Onat where he talks about the changes and improvements to the Business Central REST APIs. And I'm going through the video and he mentions stuff and I'm like, okay, and I'm learning more and picking up more points. And like, wait a minute, what? I had to pause, research. And I'm just talking about like 60 seconds of his presentation. He's talking about this stuff and just throwing stuff out there quickly as if like it's obvious, and it's deep. It's several layers. So he'll mention something, you got to know several layers deep to understand what he's actually saying. So in this event, he mentions a couple things. No more complex data types. And these are referred to as, I forget what CDEV, I don't know what there's another term for them, but no more complex, EDMs I think is what they're called. And V1.0 included EDMs or complex data types. So if you had customer, you might have contacts automatically broken out. But there is a performance hit for doing that. You have to pull those relationships whether or not they're necessary. So by removing the EDM data types, you have a significant increase in performance. So here, just removing those, they're reporting a 40% performance improvement. And moving towards a relation-based design. More on that later. The relation-based design means you refer to subpages instead of using the entire complex data type. So you have a customer, you have subpage for contacts, and those contacts, as we saw earlier in the customer information, they're not always exposed in your payload. So you have customer information, you will have no indication that there are relationships to contacts. You have to know or figure out that those relationships exist, and you have to use the expand parameter. Okay, so I kind of knew some of this stuff. So what does that even mean? You use the expand, the technical term, I believe, is a system query option or a query parameter. It returns relationship multiplicities. In English, that's like a related entity or related entry, depending on what word you use. For example, and this is from AJ's class, and I was aware of this, customers, you would expand customer financial details to have that detail show up in your result. Items, expand item category to learn more about the category. And you can apparently nest these, get fancy. So sales orders, you can expand payment term dot sales order lines account item category. I don't even know what that would look like or what that means, but apparently you can nest these and get pretty crazy. And the actual syntax, where the slash is, where the parentheses are, where you put the question mark, I have found starts to get very confusing because it is not consistent based on what I found. It's like, do I put a slash? Do I do a question mark? Do I use ampersands? And it's like you're going to have to figure that out, and it's trial and error. Okay, so there's this expand thing that can provide these related entities. Great. So where does this come from? What is this $expand business? Well, to understand that, you need to understand OData. And I think of OData as something different from a REST API, but OData, apparently, OData v4 and higher, it's a set of standards that tie into REST APIs, and this standard can be leveraged in your REST APIs, among other things, to use standardized query parameters. And in this documentation here, they're referred to as URL conventions. So if you go to odata.org, click on documentation, click on part 2 for the URL conventions and search for $expand, you will see this system query option $expand. We're a few layers deep in this warren of rabbits underground here. And it explains that this system query option specifies the related resources to be included in line with the retrieved resources. So instead of having complex data type that return everything in one payload, which can produce a complex, large payload that you may not even need that subquery data, Expand says, okay, you can optionally specify which subqueries or which related entities you want to include in your payload. So Expand is a comma-separated list of expand items. For instance, products, $expand equals category. Okay, so the implementation may be specific to your particular API, but that's the concept. You can specify which related entities you want included in your payload. Okay, I kind of knew this. But if I'm looking at my customer information payload, let's go back to what Onat said. The relations are not always exposed in the payload. So here's my customer data over there. How do I know what relationships I can request for a customer to reference in my expand parameter? That's where I got stuck. And so after all this research and pulling this together, I'm like, how do I figure this out? Now, I knew the brute force crude method. I figured out a brute force crude method way of doing this. It wasn't pretty, and I'm not even going to mention it. There is kind of a proper way of doing it. So how do you do this? Well, you check the metadata. So the word metadata appeared in AJ's blog post about the API v2.0 changes. He just says, you go to the metadata. I was like, what? what does that even mean? Why is there XML here? I'm dealing with JSON, like, and this is AL code, part dimension, API v2, caption, entity name, set, like, what? I had no idea. This is baffling to me. So type equals collection property name in $ metadata. How is someone supposed to know what that means? It was kind of assumed in everything I found. It's like, well, you just check the metadata. Okay, cool. And then you get this XML, which apparently you're supposed to be able to interpret. So the $ was my only clue. What else have we seen with a $? Well, OData. So I went back to the OData docs, searched for $ metadata, and there we go. Addressing the model for a service, whatever that means. OData services expose their entity model according to blah, blah, blah at the metadata URL formed by appending metadata to the service root URL. That is a mouthful. So host/service/ $metadata, and there's a / $metadata. Again, like I mentioned, the exact syntax is not always obvious. Like you notice it's $ metadata $$ format JSON. So it's like, wait, when do I have a /? When's the question mark? When's the ampersand? So yeah, you just got to know that. So let's see what this looks like. So Studio 4, I have Postman. Let me see if I can make this bigger. Okay, so I've got my base URL, my environment, my URL suffix. I'm going to send that to my Docker container. So my Docker container is dev18 default 7048 BC API v2.0. Your SaaS environments will have the full-on API Business Central, which is this URL up here. Your v2.0 company.com production API v2.0 $ metadata. Okay, so if you go here, this is your base URL and it shows you your entities. So I can scroll down and I can see, okay, I've got customers. Now, how do I figure out what the relationships are that are related to customers? Well, you go to metadata. So I take my base URL and add / $metadata to it. And when I submit that request, I get a 4026 line XML payload. Now, the OData spec says you may request a particular format. I don't know if this is must comply. Apparently not, because this is saying I can do $$ format equals JSON. And like, I don't care if it's XML or JSON. It's just a little confusing to a little confusing to jump back and forth. So let's try that. $$ format equals JSON. Now, when I tested this, it didn't work. So the BC API does not comply with all OData specifications or options or, parameters. Some of this stuff is apparently optional. So that didn't work for me. So if I go back to just metadata, there we go. So I have this 4026 line beast. Okay, so what do I do with this? Well, once you query using the $ metadata query parameter, you get this. So you search for your object, in this case customer, even though the query is customers, the URL. You search for the entity customer, not confusing at all. You scroll down past the properties and you'll get these navigation properties. And the navigation property name is the related entity name that you can request. Default dimensions, aged accounts receivable, and contacts, plural, information. That's how you figure this out. So let's take a look at this. So back at Postman, here's my metadata. I'm going to search for customer, and customer is referenced many places. So I keep going down, navigation property, entity type name equals customer. And I apologize, I don't think I can make this any smaller up here. So I can scroll down. Here are my properties for this customer: name, city, state, zip, website, etc. Here are my navigation properties. And if I scroll down far enough, I can see navigation property name contacts information. That is how I figure out what my related entities are so that I can find the entity name, I guess, or related entity name, so that I can put that on the end of my customers to get my contacts. It's a journey. So now that we know where to find this stuff, let's take some steps back and give that a try. So here I show that expand equals contacts information. Let's give that a try. So back in here, let me go to my customer. And if I hit my customer, let me see if this works. There we see a Datum Corporation, and it's just the customer data, no related entities. If I go to my customer expand, I added question mark, no slash for some reason, question mark expand, $ expand equals contacts information, send. Here I'm getting my standard customer information fields. And now finally, I have contacts information included in my customer payload and listed out here. And this is an array because I have multiple contacts. One is the company contact, the other is the person contact, and there finally is Robert Towns. Maybe this is obvious for some people. Wasn't obvious for me. I knew about this because I'd attended AJ's class. I did not know how to find this. And this was a circuitous journey to figure out and piece together all the crazy clues to finally understand. Now, the brute force hack method that I figured out I could do is you go to GitHub, find the AL app extensions repository under Microsoft, go to W1 API v2, find the API v2 customers AL page for the actual source code of the API page. You can scroll down, and if you look closely, you can find the related entities. But that's like not the standard or approved way of doing it. That's like if you don't know what you're doing, like me. So, whew. Yeah. I mean, so there's a lot of stuff. It's deep. And even though I knew $expand, I didn't know the last part of how to figure out what I could expand. I didn't know many of the implications of the OData integration or the support. I did not know the metadata parameter that you can only put at the end of your root URL. And notice it's / $metadata, which is different than no / question mark expand. And another thing interesting, I had seen metadata before, but I didn't know what it meant. And it was here. So you notice, even though I did not request metadata in my root service URL, it shows up here / $metadata. And I saw that. I've seen that before many times. I'm like, I don't know what that means. If I click on that, actually, I don't think it's going to authenticate. So I never tried it. I didn't, you know, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I just overlooked it and ran by it. So all these little clues pieced together actually eventually came together. It's like, the epiphany happened, and thanks to help from AJ, and thanks to his class, and thanks for Microsoft for making those videos available, going back to 2020 Wave 2 December, piecing this all together. Yep. Now, technically, I think this is available might be available in documentation. And so let's check. Oops, wrong screen. Let's check. So if I go type Business Central v2.0 API, there is documentation of this API that I'd either forgotten about it or didn't realize. And so if you go to the API here, you can see, let me make it bigger. You can see the different entities. And if you scroll down to customer, you can click on customer object, and this customer resource type, even though the URL is customers, not being picky at all, if you scroll down here, your methods get, delete, post, patch, but this navigation section also lists the related entities that you can request. So this is a little easier than doing $ metadata and scrolling through 4,000 lines of XML. This tells you, contacts information is the related entity to get your contacts. And you can then click on this and you can see it relates to customer, contact, and vendor. And here are the properties. So that's also an easier method, which I didn't realize. And that was linked in AJ's blog post, but it was one word. It was, you can read about it here. And the word here was linked, and I didn't even see the hyperlink, but it was in AJ's blog post. So, go and read his blog post like 5 or 6 times. I will try to remember to put the link below. And that has been my very circuitous learning journey to just use the expand URL parameter with the BC REST API. And with that, I hope that was useful, not too confusing. And if you're working with APIs, give it a try. Okay, enjoy.
Good.